The night wind drifted low through the hollowed streets of Dust Creek, carrying with it the dry whisper of tumbleweeds and the soft rattle of old signs swaying on rusty hinges. Lanterns burned dim in the windows, and every porch seemed to hold its breath under the heavy silence of a waiting storm. Somewhere out past the black line of the ridge, thunder mumbled like a warning, rolling over the wide Texas plain. Inside the little white chapel at the edge of town, a single light still burned. It was soft and golden, spilling through the wavy glass onto the dust-covered steps below. From a distance it looked peaceful, holy even. But inside, there was the trembling sound of a woman's voice, so quiet that only the shadows heard her. "I'm scared," she whispered, her fingers clutching the hem of her dress. "It's my first night." Her voice quivered, half from cold, half from something deeper. The dress she wore had been her mother's, kept folded for years in a cedar chest. The lace at her sleeves had yellowed, and the skirt brushed the wooden floor with a faint, ghostly sound. She wasn't used to finery, not in a place like Dust Creek where women learn to mend more than they ever learned to dream. But tonight was different. The man standing across from her looked as if the world had carved him out of sun and dust. His hat hung loose in one hand, his other rested against the pew. A cowboy through and through, his boots carried the red dirt of half the state, his shirt still damp from the storm that had chased him into town before dusk. The light caught the buckle on his belt, a plain, worn thing that had seen years of work, years of fight. He wasn't a talker, not by nature. Folks around town said he'd once been a ranch hand out near the Pecos, a man who knew how to break a horse without ever raising his voice. He'd been quiet since the moment he'd stepped into the chapel, quiet but steady, like he carried the weight of something old and unspoken. Now, he looked at her, really looked, and for a moment neither of them moved. The thunder rolled again, closer this time, shaking the glass in the windows. Outside, the storm gathered itself, crawling down the horizon with a hunger that matched the tension inside that tiny chapel. The girl, his bride, drew in a long breath and stepped closer. She had eyes that shimmered in the lamplight, full of trust and fear all at once. "They all said I was lucky," she murmured. "Said a man like you don't settle, not for anyone. But I don't feel lucky, not yet." He shifted, jaw tightening as if he was trying to find the right words. The air between them thickened, the smell of rain sneaking through the cracks in the walls. "Sometimes luck don't mean peace," he said quietly. "Sometimes it means starting over when the past ain't done with you yet." Her fingers trembled as she reached up to touch his sleeve. There was something uncertain in her movements, something almost childlike, but there was courage too. You could see it in the way she stood, tired, small, but stubborn enough to still be there. Down the road a horse neighed, sharp and uneasy. The cowboy's head turned, eyes narrowing toward the sound. A faint glow moved on the far hill, a lantern maybe, or something else. "Who's that?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped to the window, brushing aside the curtain. The dark outside was deep as spilled ink, but he could see a shadow shifting through it. The figure paused at the gate, standing just long enough to make his blood run cold. "No one that ought to be here," he muttered. The bride's heart thudded so hard she could hear it in her ears. "You think they followed you?" He turned to her then, and though his face was calm, his eyes gave him away. There was a story there, something he hadn't told her, something he'd promised himself he'd leave buried when he rode into Dust Creek that morning. "They don't take kindly to men who walk away," he said finally. "And they sure don't take kindly to those who try to start again." She swallowed hard, her breath catching. "You mean the gang?" He didn't confirm it, didn't have to. Everyone in Texas had heard of the Dalton boys, rustlers, robbers, ghosts of the prairie. If they'd marked him as one of theirs, there'd be no hiding, not even behind vows spoken under candlelight. Lightning flashed, lighting up the chapel in a white blaze. For one heartbeat, the walls seemed to breathe, the shadows alive. The bride flinched and pressed a hand to her chest. "They'll come for you, won't they?" He took a slow step forward, close enough that she could smell the rain in his coat, the faint scent of tobacco and dust. "They'll come for what they think I owe, but I got no intention of giving it." Her eyes darted to his belt where his hand rested now, steady and sure. "What if they find us before morning?" He hesitated, then smiled, a small, tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Then I reckon we make 'em wish they hadn't." The wind howled outside, banging the chapel door against its hinges. Somewhere a dog barked, distant and frantic. The bride jumped again, her fear plain as daylight. I can't do this," she whispered, shaking her head. I thought marrying you meant safety. I thought it meant a home. His hand went to her shoulder, gentle but firm. You'll have that. Just not tonight. She looked up at him, confusion and longing tangled together. Then what happens tonight? For a moment he didn't answer. The lantern flickered between them, the flame bending low as if listening. Then, slowly, he took off his belt and laid it across the pew beside him, not as a weapon but as a vow. Tonight, he said, voice low. We trust each other. You keep the light. I'll keep watch. She stared at the belt for a long moment, her lip trembling. Then she nodded, gathering what courage she could. I don't know how to be brave like you, she whispered. He gave a faint chuckle. Ain't brave if you're not scared. Outside, the sound of hoofbeats began to echo, faint but certain. 1 horse, then 2, then 3. The bride's hand found his arm again, tight now, desperate. They're here. He moved to the door, careful and silent. The old boards creaked, under his boots the storm wind seeping through the cracks like a warning. When he opened the door, just a crack, the rain hit his face, cold and sharp. Through the downpour he could see them, figures on horseback, slow moving through the mud, the glow of their lanterns bobbing like fireflies from hell. He shut the door softly and turned back to her. Get to the back room, don't make a sound. She froze. What about you? He reached for his coat, pulling it tight around him. I told you, I'll keep watch. She hesitated, tears forming in her eyes, but she obeyed. The wooden door to the back room creaked as she slipped inside, leaving him alone with the storm and his ghosts. The thunder cracked again, loud enough to shake the pews. He stood in the center of the chapel, every muscle tight, his hand brushing over the belt he'd left behind. His shadow stretched long across the floorboards, dark and still. Then came the knock. Slow, measured, 3 times. He didn't move. Evenin', Cowboy. A voice drawled from outside, rough as gravel. Heard there's a wedding in town. Thought we'd drop by and pay our respects. The cowboy's jaw clenched. He glanced, once toward the back door where she hid, then toward the window where lightning flashed again. Not tonight, he murmured to himself. Not tonight. The handle turned, the door creaked, and as the light flickered low, the storm finally broke, rain hammering the roof, the wind screaming through the eaves, while inside, one man stood, between a frightened bride and the darkness that had finally come to claim him. Then came the sound of a bootstep, another, and another, and in that breathless moment before the first shot, the cowboy closed his eyes and reached for his belt. The sound of boots echoed through the chapel like thunder chasing the storm outside. The cowboy stood still, every nerve alive, the smell of rain and gunpowder thick in the air. Lightning flared through the window, and for a split second he saw them. 3 men, soaked and mean, their coats dripping, their faces shadowed beneath wide brims. The one in front stepped over the threshold with a slow grin. Didn't expect to find you playing preacher, friend, he said, his voice rough as dry whiskey. You always did have a taste for dramatics. The cowboy didn't answer. His hand brushed the edge of the pew, his eyes never leaving the men. He could feel the weight of the old chapel pressing down, the air humming with something too still to be calm. Behind him, he could almost hear her breathing. Soft, shaky, hidden behind the back door. You got a name for yourself out here, the man went on. Dust Creek's been quiet too long. Seems to me it's due for a bit of excitement. What do you want? The cowboy asked, his tone low, steady. The man's grin widened. You know what we want. Ain't about the money anymore. It's about respect. The cowboy's jaw tightened. You boys lost that a long time ago. The leader's eyes hardened. Maybe, but we still got unfinished business. The 2 men behind him shifted, their boots scraping the wooden floor. Outside, the rain beat harder, rattling the window panes. The air was sharp with tension, thick enough to choke on. Then, from the back of the chapel, there was a faint creak, a whisper of wood. The bride had moved, too soon, too curious. The leader's eyes flicked toward the sound and the cowboy's heart dropped. Who's back there? The outlaw asked, his grin gone now. No one, the cowboy said quickly, stepping forward. It's just me. But it was too late. The man nodded toward his partner. Check it. The cowboy's muscles coiled, ready to strike. but he knew better than to move too fast. His mind raced. Every second counted. He needed to buy her time. "You boys really want to do this?" he asked, voice even but carrying that hard edge that men in the West learned young. "You think the law won't find you this time?" The leader laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Law? Ain't no law past the ridge. You know that better than anyone." And he did. Dust Creek sat too far from any sheriff, too far from justice. It was the kind of town where wrongs settled themselves, where men like him came to disappear. The second outlaw reached the back door, hand on his pistol, eyes sharp. The bride stood just on the other side, silent as she could manage, her breath caught in her chest. She didn't dare move, didn't dare pray. The cowboy took a slow breath, his hand resting near his belt. "You don't want to open that door," he said softly. The outlaw paused, smirking. "Oh, I think I do." Before he could move, the cowboy kicked the pew hard, sending it crashing into the outlaw's knees. The sound exploded through the chapel, and in the same heartbeat, the cowboy dove for his belt, the leather sliding through his fingers as the first shot cracked through the air. The bullet tore into the wooden altar, splintering the cross above it. Smoke filled the air, acrid and thick. The bride screamed from behind the door, and the cowboy shouted, "Stay down!" The second shot followed, closer this time, the flash lighting up the rain-streaked windows. The cowboy rolled behind a pew, returning fire with one quick motion. His shot struck the lantern hanging near the door, sending glass and fire scattering. For a moment, the chapel was lit in a wild, flickering blaze. "Damn fool," the leader shouted, ducking behind a pew of his own. "You'll burn us all!" The cowboy's voice came through the smoke. "Maybe that's the point!" The outlaws cursed, firing blind. Sparks danced off the floor, and smoke thickened until the air turned to ash. Then came silence. No shots. No movement. Just the hiss of rain outside and the slow crackle of flame eating at the wood. The cowboy crouched low, waiting. His ears strained for movement, his pulse pounding in his throat. When he finally stood, pistol steady, he saw that two of the men had fled. Only the leader remained, crouched near the altar, gun drawn, but wavering. "You always were stubborn," the man spat, coughing through the smoke. "Could have come back, could have had it all." "I've had enough of what you call all," the cowboy said. The outlaw's eyes narrowed. "That girl, she don't know what you are." "She knows enough," the man grinned, cruel and knowing. "When she finds out who you left in Red Hollow, she'll wish she never said I do." The words hit like a slap. The cowboy froze, a shadow of old guilt flashing across his face. But before he could answer, the outlaw lunged, too fast, too close. The pistol went off again, deafening in the small room. The bullet struck the wall, and both men crashed into the pews, fighting for control. Wood splintered. The gun clattered away. Then came the thud of a fist, the grunt of impact, the scrape of boots on the floor. It was over as suddenly as it had begun. The cowboy standing, breath ragged, the outlaw lying still among the broken pews. He didn't wait to see if he was dead. He turned, calling softly, "You can come out now." The bride stepped into the smoky room, her face pale, her hands shaking. She looked around at the wreckage, the shattered lantern, the blood on the floor, and for a moment she couldn't speak. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "The others. We can't stay here." She swallowed hard. "Where will we go?" He looked toward the door, where the rain still fell heavy and unkind. "North. Maybe the mountains. There's an old trail that'll keep us off the road." "But the storm." "Storm's the least of our worries." He grabbed his coat and holster, then paused, glancing back at the altar. The flame had caught the edge of a Bible, the pages curling like wings. He lifted it, brushed the soot away, and set it gently on the step. "Let's go," he said. They stepped into the night. The rain hit hard, washing the blood from his hands, soaking them both through. The horses were tied by the fence, restless and spooked. He mounted first, helping her up behind him. The road stretched out ahead, long and dark, swallowed by fog. Neither spoke for a long while. The sound of hooves and rain filled the silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, but steady. "You said they don't forgive men who walk away," she said. Why'd you leave them? He stared ahead, the storm reflecting in his eyes. Because I was tired of burying good men for bad reasons. Did you kill someone? She asked, hesitant, almost afraid of the answer. He didn't answer right away. Not the way they tell it, he said at last. But I didn't stop it either. She looked down, clutching his coat tighter. And now they'll kill you for it. He gave a slow nod. Maybe, but I ain't running for myself. Not anymore. The trail wound through the open prairie, where the grass bent low in the wind. Every flash of lightning showed another ghost of the past, a burned barn, a toppled fence, a cross standing alone on a hill. The land carried its scars the same way he did. When the rain eased, they stopped by a grove of cottonwoods, their branches hissing softly in the wind. He helped her down, his hands gentle despite the dirt and blood. We'll rest here till morning, he said. She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. The fire he built was small, but the light felt like a blessing. For a while neither spoke. The storm moved east, leaving behind only the dripping sound of water from the leaves. Finally, she said, That man, before you left him in there, he said something. About Red Hollow. He froze, the match in his hand burning down to his fingers. He said too much. What happened there? He sighed, looking into the fire. A job went bad. We were supposed to scare a rancher into leaving. They didn't tell me there was a family inside. When the fire caught, I couldn't stop it. The others, they just watched. Her eyes filled with quiet shock. You tried to save them? He nodded once. Pulled a little boy out. Couldn't save the rest. That's when I left. She didn't speak for a while. When she did, her voice trembled. And now they've come for you. For what I took with me, he said. Not money. Proof. Something that could bury them for good. She frowned. You still have it? He looked toward his saddlebag. Yeah, but I don't know if we'll live long enough to use it. The wind picked up again, colder now. The fire hissed low. In the distance, a coyote howled, a lonely, haunting sound that carried across the plains. The bride moved closer to the fire, her face glowing in its soft light. If you didn't run for yourself, she said quietly, then who are you running for? He turned to her, and in his eyes there was something old. Regret, hope, maybe both. For the people who never got the chance to, he said. She nodded slowly, the weight of it settling between them. Somewhere beyond the trees, thunder rolled again, distant but certain. He looked out into the dark, hand resting on the pistol at his side. They'll find us by dawn, he said. She met his gaze, unflinching now. Then we make them wish they hadn't. The cowboy smiled faintly, the kind of smile that knew the price of courage. That's the spirit, the fire crackled. The wind whispered through the trees, and far down the trail, unseen but closing fast, came the echo of hooves, 3, maybe 4 riders, cutting through the storm like shadows that refused to die. He reached for his belt, fastening it slow, the metal glinting faintly in the firelight. Get some rest, he said softly. It's gonna be a long night, she didn't argue. But neither of them closed their eyes, not with the sound of death drawing near. The night grew colder as the storm drifted east, leaving behind a restless hush that felt heavier than the rain had. The cowboy sat near the dying fire, his hat low, eyes on the shifting shadows beyond the trees. The bride dozed beside him, her head resting against a saddle, her breathing soft but uneven. Every so often she stirred, whispering something he couldn't quite catch, names maybe or prayers. He hadn't slept since before sundown. Sleep felt like a luxury for safer men. His hand rested near his gun, the smell of wet earth and smoke filling his lungs. Somewhere out in the dark, an owl called. The horses snorted and shuffled restlessly, ears twitching toward something unseen. He knew that sound, the rhythm of fear before trouble. He rose quietly, brushing the mud from his coat, and stepped toward the edge of the grove. The moon had finally broken through the clouds, pale and thin, lighting the grass with silver. He saw hoofprints in the mud, fresh ones, deep, heading south. They were tracking him still. When he came back to the fire, she was awake, eyes wide and glassy from half-sleep. They're close again, aren't they? She asked. He nodded once. They won't quit, not till they get what they came for. Her gaze drifted toward the saddlebag. You said you had something that could bury them. What is it? He hesitated, jaw tightening. Letters, names, deals signed in blood. Things folks in high places don't want known. I kept them as proof. Thought maybe one day I'd set it right. She sat up, drawing her shawl tighter. Why not give it to the law? He gave a humorless laugh. The law's part of it. Always was. There's no clean hands west of the Red River, not anymore. She stared at the fire, her face pale in its glow. Then what happens if they find you? He looked into the flames, the light flickering in his eyes. Then this all ends one way. Silence settled again, broken only by the crackle of wood. The air smelled of pine and rain and something faintly metallic, like the edge of danger. By morning, they were on horseback again, following the narrow trail through the cottonwoods. The road bent low through the valley, where the fog hung thick and heavy. The sun came slow, bleeding gold through the mist, touching the land with a false warmth. The bride held on tight, her fingers clutching the back of his coat. She was exhausted, her dress torn at the hem, but she didn't complain. She just kept riding. They passed the burned shell of a cabin near the creek. The roof caved in, the boards blackened by fire. The cowboy slowed, eyes narrowing. This place used to belong to a preacher, he said softly. Helped anyone who came through, no matter what they'd done. She looked at him. What happened to him? He sighed. The Daltons happened. Burned it down after he refused to hide them. Some folks said they left him tied to his own pulpit. The thought made her shiver. Why would you ever ride with men like that? He didn't answer right away. Because when you got nothing, even the wrong road looks like a way out. They crossed the creek, the horse's hooves splashing softly. The water ran red with clay, the current slow but steady. On the far side, the trail split. One path leading toward the hills, the other bending east toward the next town. He stopped to study the tracks in the mud. They split up, he murmured. 2 went east. 2 went north. They're circling us. What do we do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He pointed toward the hills. We ride high. Stay where the fog can't hide 'em. They climbed the rocky path, weaving through narrow turns and sharp drops. The air thinned as they rose, and the wind carried the dry scent of sage. The land stretched wide below, endless and empty. Somewhere in the distance they could see the faint glimmer of another town, just a scatter of roofs and smoke. That's Dry Bend, he said. Last town before the border. She looked down the slope, her eyes hopeful. We could go there. Maybe get help, he shook his head. Dry Bend's worse than Dust Creek. Law don't go there, only outlaws that forgot how to die. Then what are we riding toward? She asked. He didn't answer, not right away. His eyes were on the horizon. Someone who owes me a favor. As they rode, the air grew warmer, the sun climbing high. The road narrowed between cliffs, forcing them single file. She could see bullet holes scarred into the rock, reminders of old fights. This country had seen more ghosts than it had graves. By noon, they found the cabin. It was half buried in the side of a hill, the roof patched with tin, the porch sagging under years of neglect. Smoke rose from the chimney, thin and gray. Someone's here, she said quietly. He nodded, dismounting. Stay close. He knocked once, firm but not loud. The door creaked open and a woman stood there. Older, gray at the temples, her face sharp as a hawk's but kind in the eyes. Well, she said, looking him over. I'll be damned. Thought you were dead. Maybe I should have been, he said with a faint smile. We need a place to rest. She glanced past him to the bride, curiosity flickering across her face. You finally went and found yourself a wife? Something like that. The woman stepped aside. Bring her in before she freezes. You both look like hell. Inside, the cabin smelled of herbs and wood smoke. Dried flowers hung from the rafters, and an old rifle rested above the hearth. The bride sank into a chair near the fire, grateful for the warmth. The woman poured coffee, setting a cup in front of each of them. Name's Clara, she said to the bride. I patched this fool up once after a bullet near took his shoulder off. The cowboy gave a small nod. You still keep your ear to the ground, Clara? Always, she said, sitting across from him. And I heard about Red Hollow. Word is the Daltons been chasing ghosts since you left them. They caught up last night, he said. We barely made it out of Dust Creek. Clara's eyes darkened. They won't stop. You know that. Not till they find what you took. The bride looked between them. We can't keep running forever. There has to be someone we can trust. Clara's expression softened. Trust is scarce out here, sweetheart. But there might be one man, Marshal Lyle out in Canyon Ridge. He's rough around the edges, but he hates the Daltons worse than the devil hates daylight. How far? The cowboy asked. 2 days if you ride hard. He nodded slowly. We'll leave by dusk, Clara frowned. You should rest. You're both worn thin, he shook his head. They're moving fast. We can't give him another night's head start. As he checked his gear, Clara touched his arm lightly. You still carry that guilt like a brand, don't you? He didn't meet her eyes. It's earned. Maybe. But it'll kill you quicker than any bullet. Outside, the wind had shifted again. The horses stomped and snorted uneasy. The bride looked up suddenly, her heart pounding. Someone's out there. The cowboy moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see. 3 riders had stopped at the edge of the clearing, their coats dark, their faces hidden beneath wide hats. They found us, he said quietly. Clara cursed under her breath, grabbing the rifle from above the mantel. Back door leads to the creek, she said. You can follow it down the ridge. It'll buy you time. He turned to her. And you? She smiled, tired but fierce. I'll give him something to remember. He wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. He took the bride's hand, pulling her toward the back. The air outside was cold and sharp, the ground soft with mud. Keep low, he whispered. Gunfire cracked behind them, one shot, then another. Clara's rifle answered, echoing across the canyon. The bride stumbled, mud splashing her skirt, but he caught her arm, steadying her. Don't stop, he said. Not yet. They followed the creek until the cabin was out of sight, the gunfire fading into the wind. The sun dipped low, painting the hills in firelight. When they finally stopped to breathe, she looked back toward the smoke rising from the ridge. Do you think she made it? She asked. He didn't answer right away. She knew what she was doing. They rested by the water's edge, the sound of the creek masking the distant thunder of more riders. He could feel the chase tightening around them, the noose drawing closer. Marshal Lyle, she said after a while. Do you really think he'll help us? He stared into the fading light. He might, or he might hang me himself. Depends which story he's heard. The wind picked up again, whispering through the grass. The world felt small, trapped between what they'd done and what waited ahead. The cowboy stood, tightening the saddle straps. We ride through the night, he said. If we're lucky, we'll reach Canyon Ridge by morning. She climbed up behind him, her arms circling his waist, her voice soft against the wind. And if we're not lucky, he gave a small, grim smile. Then the next sunrise belongs to someone else. The horses started forward, their hooves muffled by the wet earth. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew clearer, the steady rhythm of riders who knew the hunt wasn't over. The night swallowed them whole again, and the fire of the cabin burned out on the horizon, leaving only smoke and the memory of what they'd left behind. Neither of them looked back. They couldn't afford to. Because in the dark heart of the trail, where the wind howled like the past itself, something waited, something older than vengeance, and far from finished. The wind cut through the canyon, like a blade, sharp and cold, whistling between the rocks as the cowboy and the bride rode through the dark. The moon had risen thin and white above the ridges, its light glinting off the slick mud and the silver thread of the creek beside them. Each hoofbeat echoed loud in the silence, a steady, haunting rhythm that made her hold him tighter. They'd been riding for hours, following the narrow trail that led toward Canyon Ridge. The air smelled of pine and smoke, faint but growing stronger, the smell of campfires, of men not far behind. They're gaining, she whispered. He didn't answer, just kept his eyes on the horizon. The trail dipped suddenly, leading into a patch of trees where the shadows thickened. He slowed the horse, listening. Somewhere to the west, a coyote howled. Then softer came the sound he feared most. Hooves, too many to count, moving in rhythm. They've split again, he muttered. Trying to box us in. What do we do? He scanned the ridges. We keep moving. There's a ravine a few miles north. If we reach it first, we might lose him in the rocks. The bride glanced over her shoulder. Through the trees, she saw faint lanterns flickering like fireflies in the distance. Too far to shoot, close enough to fear. The night pressed tighter around them. Every rustle of leaves felt like a hand reaching out. Every gust of wind carried the whisper of pursuit. The cowboy's jaw clenched as he spurred the horse faster, mud splattering their legs. Hold on, he said. They tore through the valley, the wind snapping at her veil, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't look back this time. She didn't have to. The echo of the riders was closing in, a dark tide rolling fast. By the time they reached the ridge, dawn had begun to bleed faintly across the sky, a thin orange glow behind the storm clouds. The trail narrowed until there was barely enough room for one horse. On either side, the ground dropped steep and unforgiving. The bride's hands trembled against his coat. "If they catch us here." "They won't," he said, though his voice lacked its usual steadiness. From below came a shout, a man's voice calling out into the morning. Another answered. Then came the crack of a rifle, echoing like thunder. The bullet struck the rock beside them, sending shards flying. The horse reared, and the bride let out a sharp cry as he fought to steady it. "Keep your head down," he shouted. Another shot rang out. This one caught the edge of his hat, spinning it from his head into the dirt. He turned in the saddle and fired back twice, aiming toward the flashes of light below. One of the riders fell, his lantern tumbling and breaking against the rocks, flames scattering like stars. But there were still more coming. Too many. He pulled the horse higher up the trail, kicking through loose stones that tumbled down behind them. When they reached a small outcropping of rock, he stopped. "We can't outrun them now," he said, breathing hard. "We'll have to make a stand." She shook her head. "There's got to be another way." He dismounted and led the horse into a shallow gap between two boulders. "There isn't," he said. "Not this time." The wind roared through the pass, carrying the sound of voices, closer now, confident. The outlaws were spreading out, climbing the slope from both sides. The bride's eyes darted toward the horizon. "We could hide," she said. "Wait until—" "No," he interrupted, checking the cylinder of his revolver. "They'll find us. Best to meet 'em head on." She wanted to argue, but something in his voice stopped her. There was no panic there, just a quiet resolve that chilled her more than fear. He glanced at her, softening for a moment. "You did good, making it this far." She tried to smile, but her lip trembled. "And if we don't make it farther?" He looked away. "Then at least it ends with us fighting." The first of the riders appeared on the slope below. 3 of them, their coats dark and soaked with mud, rifles glinting in the rising sun. They spread out like wolves, careful, silent, waiting for the right moment to strike. The cowboy crouched behind the rock, his pistol steady. He watched their movements, calm and calculating. "When I start shooting, you get behind that horse," he said quietly. "If something happens to me, you take the saddlebag and keep riding north. Don't stop for anyone." Her throat tightened. "I'm not leaving you." He looked at her then, his eyes dark with something between sorrow and pride. "You will if you want to live." Before she could answer, the echo of a gunshot ripped through the morning. The sound was so close it made her flinch. He fired back instantly, the blast lighting up the rock face. The outlaws ducked for cover, returning fire in a volley that made the whole ridge shake. The air filled with the sting of gunpowder. Dust and smoke swirled, cutting off the sky. He reloaded, his hands moving fast but sure, each motion rehearsed 100 times in the years before he'd tried to turn good. The bride pressed herself low against the rocks, praying under her breath. She could hear the bullets whining past, hear his steady breathing beside her. Then, silence. The gunfire stopped all at once. Even the wind seemed to hold still. He looked up, listening. That kind of silence only meant one thing. They were flanking him. He turned to her. "Stay here." "What are you going to do?" "Draw their fire, buy us a little time." She caught his arm. "No." But he'd already stood. He stepped out from behind the rocks, his pistol raised, the sun flashing against the barrel. A shot rang out, hitting close enough to tear his sleeve, but he didn't flinch. He fired twice, forcing them to scatter, then dove behind a fallen tree as more bullets cracked through the air. The bride covered her mouth to keep from screaming. She could see one of the riders creeping along the ridge above him, rifle aimed. She grabbed a small rock and hurled it as hard as she could. It clattered against the stones, making the man turn just long enough for the cowboy to see him. One clean shot dropped him. He looked back toward her, eyes wide with surprise, almost a smile ghosting his face. But before either of them could speak, a voice echoed from below, low, mocking, familiar. "Well, ain't this something?" The prodigal son in his Sunday best. The bride froze. The voice sent a chill down her spine. The cowboy's expression hardened. "Carter," he said under his breath. From the shadows of the ravine, a tall man rode forward on a black horse, his coat gleaming wet, a rifle resting across his saddle. His face was pale, cut with an old scar down his cheek. The look in his eyes was colder than the wind. "Been a long time," Carter said. "Thought maybe you'd forgotten your brothers." "You stopped being brothers when you started killing children," the cowboy said, stepping out into the open. Carter's grin never wavered. "We did what we had to, but you made it personal. You took from me. I took what didn't belong to you." Carter dismounted slowly, his boots sinking in the mud. "That bag," he said, nodding toward the saddle. "You hand it over and maybe I let the girl live." The bride's hand clutched the strap tighter. "Don't listen to him," she whispered. The cowboy didn't move. "You always were a liar," Carter chuckled. "And you always were predictable." A gunshot split the air, so sudden it took her a moment to realize Carter had fired. The bullet hit the ground near her feet, kicking up dirt. "Next one won't miss," Carter warned. "You've got 5 seconds, brother." The cowboy's eyes flicked to her, then to the saddlebag. He could feel her trembling behind him. His hand hovered near his pistol, every muscle tight. 3 seconds, Carter called. The cowboy's thumb brushed the hammer. 2. The wind howled, tearing through the canyon. The horses shifted nervously, the sound of metal against leather echoing like thunder. "Last chance," Carter said softly. The cowboy drew. 2 shots fired almost at once, one from each man. The sound cracked through the canyon, scattering the crows from the cliffs. The bride screamed, dropping to her knees. Smoke drifted through the cold morning air. When it cleared, both men were still standing, Carter with a bleeding shoulder, the cowboy with a torn sleeve and a look that could have burned the sky. Carter laughed, wild and breathless. "Still fast," he said, "but not fast enough next time." He motioned to the riders behind him. "Take the girl." The bride backed away, clutching the saddlebag. "Don't touch me." One of the men lunged forward. Before he reached her, the cowboy stepped between them, firing twice more. The man fell hard, rolling down the slope. Carter's face twisted. "You always did love playing the hero." The cowboy's voice was low, steady, and cold. "I ain't playing." Carter raised his gun again. The bride screamed as both men fired, their shots echoing over the canyon, smoke swirling around them. The sound faded, leaving only the ringing silence of the mountains and the faint drip of rain from the rocks above. The bride's heart pounded as she looked between them, her breath coming fast, her hands shaking. Both men were still on their feet, guns drawn, staring each other down through the smoke, then somewhere above, the sharp crack of falling rock. A sound like the earth itself giving way. The bride's eyes went wide as the cliff behind them began to crumble. And as the first boulder broke loose, rolling toward them, the cowboy turned to her, shouting one word through the chaos: "Run!" The roar of falling stone filled the canyon, drowning out every sound except the beating of her heart. The bride stumbled backward, dirt and rock sliding beneath her boots. The air turned to dust, thick and choking, as the ridge above them gave way. She caught one last glimpse of the cowboy through the haze, his silhouette framed against the breaking light, coat flaring as he turned toward her, still shouting for her to run. She didn't think. She just ran. The ground shook beneath her, the thunder of collapsing rock chasing her every step. Behind her, the mountain roared like an angry god. She reached the bend in the trail and threw herself against the side of a boulder, just as the ridge came crashing down, sealing the path behind her in a storm of stone and dust. For a long moment there was nothing. No shouting, no gunfire, only the soft hiss of settling dust and the sound of her ragged breathing. "Eli," she cried out, voice breaking. The name echoed faintly, swallowed by the canyon. She waited, desperate for an answer, but none came. Her knees gave out, and she sank to the ground, trembling. The saddlebag slid from her shoulder and fell beside her, spilling its contents, bundles of letters, faded photographs, and a small silver locket that glinted in the faint morning light. For a while, she sat there among the stones, her mind numb, her hands shaking as she picked up the scattered things. She didn't cry at first. She just stared at the dust rising where he had stood. Then slowly the tears came, hot and quiet. The sun crept higher, pushing its way through the haze. Birds returned to the cliffs, circling above the wreckage. The bride wiped her eyes and forced herself to stand. She couldn't stay there, not when riders might still be searching, not when Eli might still be alive under that rock. She began to dig, Her fingers bled against the sharp edges of stone. The dust stung her throat and eyes, but she kept at it, clawing and pulling, moving rocks one by one. Every sound made her flinch, a creak of leather, a falling pebble, afraid the men below might hear her. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Then after what felt like hours, she heard it, a muffled sound, faint but real. "A cough. Eli?" she whispered, leaning close. Another cough answered her, weak but steady. Her heart leapt. She pushed harder, using a branch as a lever to move the heavier stones until at last she saw him, his face pale and streaked with dirt, his arm pinned beneath a slab. "Don't you dare quit on me," she said through tears, trying to lift the rock. It didn't budge. He winced, his breath coming short. "You should have kept running, not without you." A faint smile touched his lips. "Stubborn girl," she wiped the sweat from her forehead. "Hold on." She looked around, spotting the horse not far off, tangled in brush but alive. With trembling hands, she looped the reins around the rock and urged the animal forward. The stone shifted just enough for him to pull his arm free. He groaned in pain, clutching his shoulder, but he was alive. They leaned on each other, staggering down the narrow trail until they reached the small clearing where the creek ran. There she helped him lie against a fallen log, washing the blood and dust from his face. His sleeve was torn, the arm badly bruised, but the bleeding had slowed. He looked at her then, eyes soft with something more than gratitude. "You should have left me," she shook her head. "You saved me first." For a long time neither spoke. The canyon was quiet again, save for the trickle of water and the rustle of wind in the pines. The sun had risen high, painting the valley in warm gold, but the air still carried the chill of dawn. Finally, he broke the silence. "That bag," he said, nodding toward it. "You know what's inside?" She glanced at it. The letters, the locket, the bundle wrapped in oilskin. "Not all of it." He took a slow breath. "It's everything they stole. The deeds, the names, the proof of what Carter did. He thought burning the records would make the town forget. I couldn't let that happen," she frowned. "So that's why he was hunting you." He nodded. "He runs half the valley now. Owns the sheriff, the traders, even the preacher. But if those papers reach the magistrate in Laramie..." He looked up at her, grim but hopeful. "It'll all come down." Her eyes drifted toward the horizon. "Then we'll take them there." He smiled faintly. "We?" "You didn't think I came this far just to stop halfway, did you?" He chuckled, wincing from the pain. "Guess I didn't." They rested until the light began to fade again, then set out under the orange glow of sunset. The path north was long, winding through wild country and ghost towns where the wind whispered through broken windows. Along the way, they stopped at an abandoned cabin, its wood gray with age. Inside, the hearth still smelled faintly of smoke, and someone long gone had left a Bible on the table. They stayed the night there. The bride wrapped his arm in a strip of linen, her hands gentle. He watched her in silence, the flicker of firelight dancing across her face. "Back in Dry Hollow," he said quietly. "I used to think the worst kind of pain was losing someone. Now I think it's never trying to save 'em when you can." She met his eyes, her voice soft. "You saved more than just me, Eli." Outside, the night was still. A coyote howled in the distance. The flames crackled low, and for the first time since the wedding, she felt the weight of fear begin to lift. When morning came, the storm had cleared. The world smelled fresh again. Wet earth, pine, sunlight on the river. They saddled the horse and started north, following the rising road that led toward Laramie. The journey was hard, the hills steep, but with each mile the sky grew wider, the air cleaner. They spoke little, but they didn't need words anymore. Every glance, every quiet smile carried what was left unsaid. By the time they reached the town, dusk had fallen. Laramie wasn't much, just a handful of buildings, a telegraph post, and the sound of hammers from the new railroad bridge. But to them, it looked like a promise. Eli slid from the horse, still favoring his arm, and handed the saddlebag to her. "You give this to the magistrate. Tell him it's from Thomas Eli Gray." She hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll be close," he said, nodding toward the stables. Just in case Carter's men made it this far. She didn't argue. She took the bag and walked up the wooden steps of the courthouse. Inside, the clerk looked up, startled at her dirt-streaked dress and wind-blown hair. "I need to see the magistrate," she said. "It's about the land thefts in Dry Hollow." An hour later, the documents were in official hands. The magistrate promised a full investigation and sent a rider south that very night. When she stepped outside again, the air felt lighter somehow, as though a burden had lifted from the whole valley. Eli was waiting by the fence, his hat low over his brow. When he saw her, he smiled. "Did you tell him?" She nodded. "It's done. Then it's over." For the first time, those words sounded real. They left Laramie before dawn, heading east where the prairie opened wide. The grass shimmered silver in the early light, stretching on forever. Neither of them knew exactly where the road would lead. Maybe a small ranch, maybe another town, maybe just peace for a while. As they rode, the wind tugged gently at her veil, now torn and dusty but still bright against the plain. She looked at him and smiled. "What'll we do now?" He thought for a moment, then said, "Live quiet, maybe start again. Somewhere no one knows our names," she nodded. "That sounds nice." For a while they rode in silence, the only sound the steady rhythm of the horse and the whisper of the wind. Then she looked back one last time at the mountains fading behind them, the place where everything had changed. "You think they'll ever forgive us?" she asked softly. He followed her gaze. "Maybe not, but they'll remember we tried." The sun climbed higher, turning the world to gold. The river beside them sparkled, winding its way through the valley like a promise that never ended. By the time they disappeared into the horizon, all that remained behind was the echo of hooves and the faint shimmer of light where the dust met the sky. Two souls bound by a single truth, that sometimes courage isn't in the fight, but in the choice to keep riding when the world gives every reason to stop. And though the story of the cowboy and the bride would fade with the years, the folks in Dry Hollow still whispered it by lamplight, the tale of a woman who wouldn't run, a man who wouldn't surrender, and the night the mountain fell but love still stood.